Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board meeting of Wednesday, November 26th. So a full agenda today, a very full agenda, and we are starting late. So we will get right to it as I call to order, and then I will ask Member Dave if you would read the right acknowledgement, please.
We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. And further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diversity.
Here. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest at this time? Yes. Member,
Yes, for the topic on Blue Mountains coming up for easement. Even though I cleared it with the integrity commissioner, just on my own safe view of it. Anyway, I'm gonna read it right back.
Okay, certainly. Thank you for that. Over any additional agenda items? Hoping not, because oh boy, we've got a lot. Adoption of the agenda. Move that the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors approve the agenda of November 26, 2025. May I have a move in the seconder, please? Shaw, Member Farmer, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Approval of the minutes in your package, the minutes of the fall authority meeting of October 22nd, 2025. And I will move that the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors approve the full authority minutes of October 22nd, 2025. Mover and seconder, please. Member Winter, Member Shaw. Any questions, comments? Seeing nothing. All in favor of approving the minutes? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm not sure how we're going to do that. Please yell and vote if you can. Sorry.
Kathy should still be able
you
to
can say
use the
aye.
reactions. If the thumbs up still works, then that might be an easy way to do that.
Can you hear
Give me
me?
a smiley face. Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. I'll just yell yes or no.
Yeah. You have 6 business out of minutes. There's nothing at this time, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to pull anything from today's consent agenda? Seeing nothing, I will move that in consideration of the consent agenda items listed on the November 26, 2025 agenda, the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors receives the following items. 1. Environmental Planning, Section 28 permits, October 2025. 2. Administration receipts and expenses, October 2025. Item 3. Minutes, BRWI, July 31st, 2025, and October 14th, 2025. Item 4. Correspondence, including the United Countries, of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, resolution number 2025-159. B. The Essex Region Conservation Resolution 90/25. And finally, point 5, the recent media articles. May I have a mover and seconder, please? Member Shaw and Member Day. All in favor of receiving the consent agenda? And that is
Yes.
passed. Thank you very much. Okay, now moving on to point 8, delegation. We do have a delegation regarding the Pease Marsh easement proposal. That's attachment 8 in your packages.
So sorry. Sort of puts them on.
Yeah.
You sure time that?
Thanks, Alan. I think so. Sure. He's just pulling up the slides. It will just be a second. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. We're a little kerfuffle because we're not normally in this room, so just bear with us.
No issues at all. Let's go.
All right, thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. I understand I have 10 minutes, so I want to walk through this slideshow and then make sure we have some time for some presentations. My name is Dan Hurley. I'm president of the commission. Our project manager for this project. We're engineering representatives of Homefield Community Developments, who are the proponents on this development project in the town. Representing Homefield Developments online today, we have Managing Director, Mr. Andrew Adams. He's also available should specific questions come up. The purpose today is to present to the board information regarding a proposed development in the town of Blue Mountains, make a specific request of the Great Sauble Conservation Authority related to permissions to grant an easement, GSA landscape, and the servicing of the series of slides that I can walk through that just will help explain the situation and the details of the gaps. So the first slide, next slide, please. So the site itself is hard to see on the scale, but the site itself is just east of the main village of Thornbury, west of Campground, south of the Georgian Trail, south of Highway 26, and east of Gray Road 2. Specific to Great Sauble Conservation Authority lands, immediately across the highway is the Peace Marsh Conservation Authority, or Peace Marsh Conservation Area. And in addition, the Conservation Authority owns several parcels south of main Peace Marsh that are Great Sauble owned, that are persons that are separate from the main piece, but still owned by Great Sauble Conservation. And then one of those parcels that we referred to today on the south side. The development itself, the land that we're seeing here is 37 acres. There's approximately 27% of that property is actually being considered for this development. I'm not getting into some of the specifics of that. The proposal is for 245 townhouses and semi-detached. They're intended to be a private development, and one of the main thrusts of this project, Homefield is proposing is to hit the town sustainable affordable housing targets in partnership with town. Next slide, please. This depicts the development concept, so it's a very zoomed in specific portion of the development. There's a large green space that's set aside for 2/3 of the property to the south. There's some setbacks to the north related to Indian Brook. On the east side, northeast side, trail, and then subject land, Georgian Trail. So, excellent. This slide depicts the servicing option that proposed. So the development itself, which is serviced by sewer and water, as well as stormwater management, has to connect into the town's infrastructure in order to be successful. And the preferred servicing option, the property slopes from Gray Road 2 towards Highway 26. The proposed servicing option is to utilize access from the Georgian Trail to Highway 26, sewer, water. And Great Sauble Conservation Authority regarding to the servicing of the site and stormwater management setbacks for floodplain, EIS submissions, things of that nature, and are fairly far along in the approval process. Then subject to final approvals from both agencies, and now is an appropriate time for us to try and finalize this servicing option that's in front of us today. Other servicing options site are available. They would include, fortunately, infrastructure that is many times more significant. This directional drill crossing will only be about 7 meters, whereas other servicing options, draining the services to a pump station for the sanitary that would then come all the way back through the development, down Grade Road 2 to Clark Street, and Clark Street up to Highway 26. So it's significant disturbance, two additional crossings of Indian Brook itself, and much more complicated servicing arrangement. And to this end, based on conversations with the town, evaluations of all the servicing options, the idea that this is simpler, way better for maintenance, way better for operational perspective. Minimizes not only short-term disturbance, but also implications is why it's preferred and why we're here today. And there is, I believe, attached to the package a note from sort of indicating the status of our conversations with their support in a general sense for this servicing option, subject to very Sauble. So I do spell out some of that in the slides to just a lower impact, less construction for process. It's a simple gravity connection that can be done via directional drill. And next slide, and a bit more. Proposed easement details. So the easement itself would be in favor of the town of Blue Mountains. So this infrastructure would be the town of Blue Mountains to own and operate, and would be in the underground status. They would just have an easement. The easement would primarily be an underground easement for accessing, if required, taking out structure. And that would cross through. It would be 8.5 meters wide to allow for both pipes to be in the ground spacing, and would be installed via trenchless technology, so no surface work would be required. And trenchless technology is implemented it's a very common practice nowadays. You can imagine in bigger municipalities, major highway crossings. Highway 26 itself has many of the crossings in them. Very common, very safe. The pipes itself are in steel casings with threaded concrete for the duration. So once they're in, they're a very long period. So as I said, the easement itself would be only as it relates to allowing the town to do maintenance of the pipe underneath, which they could do from either end if they needed to. But the town does want included in the easement in the allowance that they have to, for some purpose, need to install a pump bypass of the infrastructure, allow for a pump pipe to be laid on land across the easement if work's being done in either structure, just as a bypass option. So the easement would include allowance for the pipes to put on surface. So that would be the one instance which it's not something that would only be emergency purposes, where there might be some short-term use of it. Next slide. As I indicated, some of this I touched on. It's going to be a trenchless construction technology industry standard. We're working through that town right now. They're familiar with this technology, the exact means. We're sorting out, but it certainly has the longest life cycle of any type of installation. It's fairly common and said grouted steel casings. Typically, this would be the appropriate way to install this type of service in an area where we do not want to have any service. To doing the trenching technology, there some subsurface investigations done to determine exactly the soil type, the right depth. If there's any, just to make sure it's being put in a manner doesn't disturb it. Existing conditions, subsurface conditions, groundwaters. Part of, design this.
About 15 seconds left. I know. Okay, I believe I have another slide.
I think we're done. Just go to the next slide. Easement compensation and appraisal, so that the owner recognizes that this easement does put an encumbrance on the title of the land. It is, something they're willing to discuss, subject to whatever terms you like to discuss with appraisal. There's a large portion of the land is being preserved, and there's been discussions about it. There's interest in some parties in the land, what's spelled out in this slide presentation here, and that sums up our.
Excellent, thank you. This is obviously leading right into our next conversation on the Peasmore proposal under our business items. So I will ask if anybody does have any questions for either the gentleman now, but knowing we will be discussing this shortly, and I'm sure there'll be questions in there as well. So one opportunity now. Okay, thank you very much for the
Thank you.
presentation, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And that will move us into business items. And obviously the first item is the conservation lands and the Peasmore easement proposal. So Anthony will be presenting on this. I'm just going to give a quick reading of the motion, and then we can have the conversation. Whereas the Great Sauble Conservation Authority under Section 21C has the power to acquire by purchase, lease, or otherwise any land that it may require, and subject to subsection 2, to sell, lease, or otherwise dispose of land so acquired. Whereas GSCA acquired the Peasmore's Nature Preserve over the years 1959 to 1973, and whereas GSCA defines nature preserves as properties that have been left unmanaged to protect them in a natural state. These properties were acquired to protect them against further development or to preserve sensitive features, flora, or fauna. And further, whereas the original Peasmore's property acquisition deed states the guaranteed covenants and agrees to hold and use the lands hereby conveyed as a sanctuary for the conservation and protection of desirable wildlife, flowers, and trees in accordance with provisions of the Conservation Authorities Act, that the GLCA Board of Directors decline Homefield Communities' proposed servicing easement through Peasmore's Nature Reserve. They have a mover and a seconder just to get it on the floor and move the student Rebecca's presentation. Member Farmer, Member Day, thank you. Rebecca.
John, can you hear me okay? You said the test.
Yeah, I can hear you. It was a little,
Okay.
there were some moments in the presentation where it was harder as the presenters turned away from the mic, but as long as folks are speaking to the mic, I think the audio has been okay for me.
Okay, great. Okay, so Peasmore Nature Preserve encompasses 58.5 acres located just east of Thornbury along Highway 26. It's a unique property ecologically and has been preserved since the Marsh family settled in 1850. In 1959, Edith L. Marsh sold the original 25 acres to GSCA, as shown in Appendix 3. The deed contains the covenant that Rob already gave us earlier. From 1962 to 1973, 3 more parcels were acquired with 50% funding from the province, which now comprise the entirety of Peasmore Nature Preserve, which is merged and managed as one property. There are several internal policies and legislation that support staff's recommendation to decline the proposal. Our land disposition policy defines our 3 property classifications, in which nature preserves are properties that have been left unmanaged to protect them in a natural state. These properties were acquired to protect them against further development or to preserve sensitive features, flora, and fauna. Last year, the Conservation Area Strategy, which was a requirement of the Provincial Management Programs and Services, outlines several objectives of our lands. And of note is natural heritage, to protect, restore, and regenerate the natural ecosystem of GSCA properties by ensuring the health and diversity of native species, habitats, landscapes, and ecological processes. As per Section 21(2) of the Conservation Authorities Act in our acquisition and disposition policy, GSCA cannot sell, lease, or otherwise dispose of land without providing written notice to the minister, at least 9 days before disposition. And the disposition policy defines disposition as selling, exchanging, granting of easement, or otherwise disposing of the property. Public consultation is required for a minimum of 45 days. The property includes areas of natural and scientific interest, lands within the Niagara Escarpment Planning Area, wetlands as defined in Section 1 of the Conservation Land Act, and a portion of Pease Marsh falls just within the escarpment recreation area. Additionally, the habitat of threatened or endangered species, which would need to be investigated if there are some on the property. Under the ministry policies and procedures for disposition of conservation authority property, all dispositions must fulfill the objectives of the authority, protect provincially significant conservation lands and managed or agreement forest lands, be based on market value, follow an open process, and be accurately defined. And the minister will not generally approve property dispositions of authority land as deemed as provincially significant. So the one out of the list that is there is potentially habitat of an endangered species, which would need further studies. So in summary, GSCA staff does not support the proposal for the following reasons. The deed for the original 25 acres entrusted GSCA to protect this land as a sanctuary, and it's not appropriate to divide out historical parcel acquisitions when the property is merged and managed as one. The definition of nature preserve, there's no potential for, or there is potential for presence of threatened or endangered species. It does not meet the objectives of GSCA lands as outlined in the conservation strategy. 3 out of 5 acquisitions utilize a 50% grant from the province. And perhaps one of the most important relevant reasons is that approval of this use would set a precedent that GSCA lands are available for future development. There are no financial considerations at this time, but if the GSCA board of directors decide to move forward with an easement, then compensation would need to be discussed with the developer.
Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any questions?
This is through the chair. Rebecca. So can you just clarify, even though we would not be selling this land, an easement would be considered a disposition?
Correct.
Under the act, which would then require all of those other steps that you outlined, including public consultation and approval from the Niagara Escarpment.
Not approval, but that's considered with the minister when they make those decisions. We have to provide 90 days notice.
Any questions? Norbert.
I'm curious how this request, assuming that was to me, curious how this request compares to other requests we've gotten in the past. Have there been similar requests for easements or access to GSCA lands to support development?
Through the chair, I'll pass it over to Tim after. From top of mind, historically, for example, potentially when we were acquiring properties, there would be some easements for things like Hydro One. And then there have been instances where we have done an agreement, not necessarily on title, but to assist like a neighboring landowner with drainage issues. And then worked, of course, with the municipalities on drainage. But as far as my knowledge, from our land parcel layers, I'm thinking it's more so in relation to like utilities for hydro.
Yeah. Through Mr. Chair. We do have some other easements on title for access properties that typically, there's one actually at Pease Marsh across the road where there's 5 or 6 residential lots that are completely isolated within our Pease Marsh property. And those easements occurred to do a position. So they were reversal of it. We have others, Williams Lake, we have one that's a driveway access for somebody who's otherwise locked up against the lake. And again, that was for the acquisition piece. The only one that I can recall in relatively recent memory, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, is the board had approved in principle a drainage easement from a proposed subdivision in the township of Jordan Bluffs, small subdivision, that would have gone across our property. It never went ahead at that time. And if we were reviewing it again now, we would factor in some of the items that Rebecca is talking about now. That property was not considered nature preserve though, so the classification of the property was also different.
Following up through the chair, just to clarify then, so the other examples that we've heard then, the easements were at the time of acquisition as part of that process, or supported drainage through GSCA lands, which to my understanding, maybe this is incorrect, but managing water flow is part of what we do. And none of those apply to the property classification that we're being asked to consider for today. Is my understanding on those 3 points correct?
You're correct.
Perfect.
Again, I guess just to understand where this property is in relation to our property, it looks like there is a subdivision to the west of our property, south of Highway 26, between Gray Road 2. So is this proposed development going south of that existing subdivision? And maybe this is a developer question, and I guess why couldn't you service into that subdivision?
Through your chair. I believe you're referring to the trailer park. There's like a trailer park that's just south of Indian Brook. Like just north of this parcel. That trailer park doesn't have service.
Okay. I'm just looking at the aerial map,
Yeah.
so it's not.
No, there's no nearby here.
Any questions? You've heard the recommendation, which is to decline on the request. So we will put it to the vote. All in favor of the motion? Keep hands up so that everybody can get the chance to.
Member first.
Didn't hear the vote. We are voting on the recommendation.
He's going from decline. So are you in
Yes.
favor of the motion?
Yes, I am.
That is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to number 2, administration. This deals with the proposed changes to the Conservation Authorities Act information. Attachment number 10 in your package. Tim will be presenting on this. This is a fun one, so get strapped. Buckle up.
I'll just take a second.
Sure. Well, while you're doing that, I'll actually read the recommendation. Whereas the government of the province of Ontario, the province has released Bill 68, which changes the Conservation Authorities Act to create a new Ontario Provincial Conservation Agency and alludes to regional conservation authorities. And whereas the province has issued ERO posting 025-1257 to gather feedback on the structure of such regional conservation authorities, that the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors receive this report as information and direct staff to prepare comment submission for ERO posting 025-1257. And a mover and a seconder, please. The winner is member Shaw. I'll turn over to CEO Lempier to give presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll try to summarize this. There is a lot going on right now. So essentially, what we have before us in terms of changes to the Conservation Authorities Act and changes to the way we operate, the relationship between conservation authorities and municipal partners and really the rest of the world, is two primary things that are in front of us right now. One is Bill 68, which amends the Conservation Authorities Act quite substantially to create Ontario Provincial Conservation Agency, which would be an agency of the Crown, sits between the conservation authorities and our home ministry, which is the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. And included in your board package today is a redline version of the relevant pages of the Conservation Authorities Act to show what that change looks like specifically. The other thing that we're looking at is an ERO posting, or Environment Registry of Ontario posting, that proposes changes to the actual conservation authorities in Ontario, going from the current 36 conservation authorities across the province to 7 regional conservation authorities across the province. So I'm going to talk about these two items one at a time to give you a high level overview. So we, as conservation authorities within the province, had a briefing meeting with the Minister of the Environment and the new Chief Conservation Officer, San Acid, on Friday, October 31st at 8 a.m. to let us know about an announcement that was coming out publicly at 10 a.m. that morning, announcing these things that we're about to talk about right now. So that was the first hearing of it for the chairs of the organizations and for the CAOs of the organizations. Bill 68 itself is part of a budget bill that was introduced on November 6th, so about a week later at Parliament, and that's the Plan to Protect Ontario Act budget measures number 2. Schedule 3 of this bill is what creates the changes to the conservation authorities. So this new agency that will be created upon final reading or third reading in Royal Assent, the changes are to oversee the governance of authorities and other aspects of the authorities, such as their operations, including programs and services, to oversee the transition from the current framework to a regional framework, to promote consistent policies, standards, and fees for programs and services provided, to assess and report on the effectiveness of authorities, back to the ministry and the government, to oversee and evaluate financial performance of the authorities, to guide and evaluate the strategic planning of authorities to ensure it aligns with provincial objectives, to support development and implementation of standardized and centralized systems for processing applications. So this would be our development applications. Lead the development and implementation of digital strategies and shared services, support strategic investment in programs and services provided by authorities, and to advise the Government of Ontario in respect of the programs and services that authorities provide. The minister, being the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, can issue directions to the agency. So just to ensure that we're all on the same page, and direction issued by a minister is a rule essentially that you have to follow, but something that doesn't require actual regulation to go into effect. Examples of directions that we've seen in recent years are the direction to freeze fees for development applications that we see. So that comes as the minister's direction. He sets a timeline on that, December 31st each year, and then for the past couple of years, that's been reviewed. So that's an example of a direction. In turn, the agency can issue directions to one or more of the authorities, which the authorities must comply with, and these can relate to the items listed here: KPIs, service delivery targets, service standards, IT, procurement, training of members and employees, budgeting, really all of the operating factors of an authority, as well as overseeing the governance structures of the authority. The agency may determine its costs, and it may apportion these costs to conservation authorities. I want you to read this as it may apportion its costs to municipalities, because conservation authorities already have the power to apportion their costs to municipalities, and if new costs are borne, those fees have to come from somewhere. As of the writing of this report on November 19th, Bill 68 had received first reading and second reading and was being debated. I didn't check it this morning, but last check on Monday afternoon, it was still being debated, and it may be sent to standing committee because there are other things in the bill that are driving this. I don't think the changes to the Conservation Authorities Act extended debate at this point. Upon third reading and royal assent, which is expected later this month or early in December, the bill would become. So the other side of this then is the ERO posting about amalgamating the 36 authorities into 7 authorities, and I'll go over what that looks like in a second. Right now, through the ERO posting, there's an opportunity to provide comments. I would encourage your municipalities to provide comments on this, and I'm happy to support in any way that I can. I've set up meetings with most of your municipalities to attend and actually provide this presentation. If I'm certainly happy to work with staff as well and answer any questions as well. Specifically, the province is requesting feedback on key factors to support a successful transition, opportunities or benefits that this structure provides, suggestions for a governance model, which have not been suggested by the province at this time, suggestions on maintaining transparent and consultative budgeting processes, and telling the province how a regional model can strengthen local relationships. We'll note that none of the questions are, is this a good idea? What is the cost benefit analysis? So it's essentially come out, and it might sound facetious, but essentially what they're saying is, here's what we're saying, tell us all the reasons this is good. And how it's gonna work. So there's a lot of unknowns at this point. And information's been dripped out a little bit at a time. So if we look at, you'll have this on the screen, but you'll also have it in your board package slide deck. You can see a map showing the 36 conservation authorities in Ontario right now. Predominantly in southern Ontario, with a few scattered up in northern Ontario. And then if we look at what's being proposed, we see the 7 regions there. So the St. Lawrence Regional Conservation Authority, so RCA's Regional Conservation Authority out in the eastern part of the province, Eastern Lake Ontario, RCA, as you would expect on the eastern side of Lake Ontario, Central Lake Ontario, RCA, which is not actually the current Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, but rather the Toronto Region Conservation Authority renamed, but its boundaries remain exactly the same. Western Lake Ontario, which is sort of the Mississauga, Oakville, Halton, Hamilton, Niagara region. And then Lake Erie Regional CA, which again, as it suggests, covers Lake Erie, Northeastern Ontario Regional CA, and then the Huron Superior Regional Conservation Authority, which is the one that we fall within, which includes Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority on the far northeast, which is Newmarket, Aurora, Richmond Hill, Barrie area. And then following along the Lake George Bay shoreline, we have Nottawasaga Valley, Grey Sauble Conservation, and then down the Lake Huron shoreline, Saugeen Valley, Maitland Valley, and Sauble Bay Field. So down to about the Port Franks area, Grand Bend area. To see what those look like together, I've crudely whited out the ones that are not part of our region, and you can see the scale of that. So when we look at this, I want you to consider scale as one of the primary things to think of. Scale in terms of the land area involved, and scale in terms of the number of municipalities served by this new regional. I've included this slide in the presentation because, well, A, it's important, but B, I do plan to present this to individuals who are not yourselves. But the new system will encompass the same watershed boundaries. So there will be no lessening of watershed boundaries or increase in watershed boundaries, but rather the governance structure and the staffing structure and the organizations themselves change size. And so we do keep that watershed model, which is very important because water obviously flows downhill and municipal boundaries don't do a good job of capturing that. So the impacts of flooding where a watershed model does. A couple of other things to keep in mind when we think about the scale of these is the fundamental principles of how and why conservation authorities started in the first place. So it started as a local initiative. Yes, we operate under provincial legislation, but the provincial legislation is the tool that allowed municipalities to provide this system, which has been considered the gold standard around the world in terms of minimizing flood damages and maintaining environmental health on that watershed basis. So essentially, 2 or more municipalities would petition the minister to create a conservation authority, and that's what happened across. The Grey Sauble itself used to be the Sauble Valley Conservation Authority and the North Grey Region Conservation Authority. Important thing to remember with these two is they had the same board of directors and they had the same staff. So the amalgamation was more in name and the entity itself. So this happened, for Grey Sauble, it happened in 1957 and 1958 that we were created and amalgamated in 1985, but the legislation took place in the 40s. And there was a division of costs that was shared between the province and the municipalities. So in that way, it was a partnership. That partnership, as we've discussed in the past, has changed dramatically. The Conservation Authority itself, in our case, covers about 49% of the operating or the budget of the entity of the authority, and municipalities cover about 44%, and that remaining 6 or 7% is the province, the lion's share of which is for source water protection. Only 1% is for the other operating programs that we have. Some of this I'm going to skirt over, as you know this. But Conservation Authority serves the province of Ontario, cover the living locations of about 14 million people. We deal with over 32,000 planning permit applications a year. We own and operate $3.8 billion worth of flood control infrastructure, protect and prevent more than $150 million of damages and disruption every year from floods. We work with landowners that plant over 1 million trees a year. We offer over 3,500 kilometers worth of trail, recreational trail for people to enjoy. The Grey Sauble, some of this I went over already, but you'll recognize that we do have 8 member municipalities with 11 members, very well distributed and democratic system, all elected officials. We cover about 3,100 square kilometers at 5 major river systems and employ about 28 full-time staff, plus seasonal staff, a budget of $4.2 million. So in here, I've put some items for your consideration, and I don't plan to read through these individually, but when I said to start think that I'd like you to think about scale, I'd like you to talk with your municipalities about scale, is we currently have about 3,200 square kilometers of area in Grey Sauble, which is large. And to my way of thinking, and certainly when you're on the landscape and staff have to drive around to do different things, it's a large area. In our new regional conservation authority that we would be part of, it would now be over 23,000 square kilometers, and would also include Thunder Bay, which that one, I don't know the rationale, and I don't know when this all rolls out at the end and finalizes if Thunder Bay would still be part of it, because my understanding is they're not super happy about being lumped with a bunch of southern CAs either. We currently have 8 member municipalities, and you all have a voice at the table. In the new model, there would be 80 member municipalities within our region. You will not have a voice at the table. It's not tenable to have an 80 member. And we have to consider that we have very small municipalities paired with municipalities like Newmarket, Richmond Hill, Erie, Thunder Bay. So know what the governance model looks like. That hasn't been provided to us. I think it's fair to say everyone who's sitting at the table today will not be sitting at that same table in the future. So those are 2 of the big things. Conservation authorities provide service locally. We work with donors, we work with volunteers, we work with community partners. We listen to our municipalities and our community members to try and do what's right for our local communities. When we are reaching 23,000 square kilometers with 80 municipalities, they don't know that same service. Some of the questions that we need to ask local offices to provide that on the ground service. Is there a governance structure that allows each of you to still have a voice at the table? We have questions about who truly governs the work of the new authorities. There is intended to be a board of directors, but the OPCA, the Ontario Provincial Conservation Agency, has input and oversight of operating things. As we saw, they can issue directions related to how we operate, and they have oversight of governance. So I don't know how much autonomy that the new regional boards will have or not. We don't know. We don't know what happens to reserves that we've built. We assume they pull. We don't know what the debt profiles and liabilities are of the other current conservation authorities that we would group with. Donations, how they're handled, or if they even exist. So what we do know is typically, you might have friends of group provincial park. I don't think anybody's donating to MTO or MECP. How are local land holdings preserved? So certainly at this board table, we've had discussions in the past about are there properties that the authority can divest of that don't meet our interests? It's one type of discussion when there are 11 of you in a room and you know the different areas that you're dealing with. It may be a very different discussion when it's at this regional scale and the person making or the people making those decisions don't have that same connection to the local landscape. Same thing with prioritization of asset management planning. Who subsidizes who in the new funding models? How does apportionment work? And the big one for me is I'm at a loss to understand how more bureaucracy can improve efficiency and do any sort of reduction of costs. So one of the things that we've heard from the minister and we've heard from the new chief conservation exec is that this is to help municipalities to reduce duplication where you have overlap with more than one conservation authority. Now, I would note that, yes, there's definitely municipalities that have overlap. So Town of Blue Mountains, in our case, has an overlap between ourselves and Nottawasaga. Erin Eldersley has an overlap between ourselves and Saugeen. So does Grey Highlands actually has 3 conservation authorities. But there are 36 conservation authorities. There are 444 municipalities. So yes, you're going to have it's already substantially more streamlined than the number of municipalities in the province. What I'm worried about is through this, it's going to cost you more money because let's go on the assumption that the local offices remain. So you still have staff at those local offices. You still have somebody managing a local office. But now you also have regional office and costs associated with the regional office. You potentially have leveling up of salaries across staff to address the fact that staff would likely get paid what they get paid at the highest paid agency. I don't know that. We're speculating here. But now you also have another level of administration and bureaucracy with the Ontario Provincial Conservation Agency that is again funded indirectly by municipalities. So we're adding 2 layers of administration and bureaucracy. Our experience is that things that happen at provincial offices don't tend to be as nimble or as quick as things that happen at local offices. So I fail to see how it's cheaper. And the minister actually never said it would be cheaper. They never said it was a cost savings. They also never said that it wouldn't cost more. I do expect more bureaucracy. I have concerns about how it's going to work when that information hasn't been provided by the province at this point. And I have concerns for programs that community actually appreciates in terms of the category 3 programming. So it's not that the community doesn't also appreciate category 1. One of the category 1 items here that is one of the drivers and the impetus here is planning and regulations. And how can we improve service there to make it more efficient, to get building completed faster? And what we risk is our category 3 programs. So the stewardship work that we do, the tree planting that we do, the education programming that we do, the improved or expanded water quality monitoring. The minister has said all this programming will continue. Currently has agreements signed with 8 member municipalities. It may be more difficult to sign agreements with 80 municipalities. The last slide I've included for you some articles that we found that talked about and looked at amalgamations of municipalities. And I'm certainly no expert on amalgamation, and I know it's been looked at through the OPP boards and the health boards, and certainly it was forced on municipalities in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. The examples from the municipalities do not seem to suggest that it improved efficiencies or that it saved money. It shows the opposite. What they also seem to suggest is that providing opportunities for cost sharing, not amalgamation, might be a better solution. So the 2 drivers that we're hearing from the province on this are, we're doing this for you as municipalities to reduce duplication and improve efficiencies. And on the other hand, that there are a number of changes that we want to see to development and planning regulations to, again, improve efficiencies and make things go faster. So from our perspective, when I think about those 2 items, I don't think that we're going to see what they say we're going to see from a municipal perspective. And I think you as municipalities should be asking for the cost benefit analysis from the province to be done in advance to prove that what they're doing is not going to make things worse. Because my concern is that you're going to pay more money and you're going to have a smaller voice at the table. From the planning and permitting side of it, some of the ideas that the province has come forward with are that they'd like to control the fees, they'd like to control the policy, they'd like to control the technical guidance, they'd like to create and control an online permitting system. And I don't think you need to amalgamate 36 organizations into 7 to accomplish that. I think you can provide the policies, they have the power to regulate already and legislate. You can provide the technical guidance that we've been asking for over a decade. You can provide the online permitting system, put the caveat in there if you can prove that it works better. Because we've heard some horror stories about the MTO's online permitting system. And in terms of setting the fees, the province can set the fees. So the only item that's not addressed there is the idea of better resource sharing and better resources to smaller conservation authorities to be able to provide the same level of service as larger conservation authorities. Again, I'm not sure how amalgamation solves this, unless you're going to tell somebody from that they need to move to Paisley or something along those lines. Because if it's just about sharing the resources, there's no reason, again, that you need to amalgamate to do. So in terms of next steps for us, like I said, I will be presenting to most of your councils. I wasn't able to get into Georgia Bluffs Council. I was a little bit too late in signing up, but this is a bit of a rapid fire thing to get everything lined up. And I know your councils are also very busy at this time of year with budget and other things. But if staff are presenting, I'd be happy to be there to support and to answer any questions that council may have. I'll be meeting with our local MPP on Friday of this week to talk to him about this and let him know the concerns as I see them and any concerns that you provide me today or positive things. And I'm meeting with Grey County CAOs later this week, and I met with Bruce County CAO last week as well. We need to provide comment to the province on the questions that they've asked on the ERO as well as answer some of the questions or pose our own questions for things that they haven't moved forward, but that should be considered before moving forward with something scale. And I think the best option here is there's one of two things, is that we get your feedback from you here today, any thoughts that you have. We can either roll those up and you can give direction to staff to prepare comments and provide them, or to prepare comments and bring them back to the December 17th meeting of the board for your approval for those comments. It's kind of close. It does still fall within the ERO timeline, assuming the province sees that timeline out to its duration. So through you, Mr. Chair, and welcome any comments or questions.
Great, thank you, Tim. Open it up, fully stating that Tim has synopsized that extremely well. I'm excited at all the meetings. There were a lot of people asking a lot of questions in the chat that did not get answered. You can ask questions and Tim won't be able to answer them either, but have at it.
So the deadline to make comments is when was coming over?
Excellent questions, Mr. Chair. So the deadline to make comments is December 22nd. I would recommend making comments as soon as possible because there's two different things. That deadline is not for the Bill 68. That deadline is for the ERO posting. Bill 68 could be approved any day, or may already be. And so in terms of your second question, when would it come into effect? What we're hearing from the province right now is that they will have a formal consultation period by December 22nd, that they plan to have consultative meetings with conservation authorities, municipalities, Indigenous communities, others throughout the spring. And then current board members would ride out your terms at council until the municipal election. Following the municipal election, the province is suggesting that they would appoint another board to run these regional CAs. The timeline seems this is not the right word, hopeful, this may be a better word. Just given that you're going to have councillors that are just coming up with a municipal election, and there's always a bit of a scramble with that. But also, we know nothing about the proposed governance structure right now, or funding models. There's a lot of unanswered questions to be answered before we move this model.
Well, the Great Sauble Conservation Authority, the other conservation authorities are not handcuffed in any way to go out to the public and raise concerns about this?
Are we not allowed to?
Yeah, because they do have an idea. You're not allowed, you can.
I'm taking comment, yeah.
Public can comment, so our CEO of Conservation Authority could go out to, say, the town of Blue Mountains, to an invitation to a speaker series to talk about this, to raise awareness.
In theory.
I'll leave that. No, okay.
It's about expedient. I mean, literally, this is a very short window. That's the big problem. So most public engagement meetings.
Well, the problem is, I mean, elected officials might know about this, or some of us, but the public won't. They'll know less. Right, that's who you need to probably, you need to take this in the court of public opinion, I think.
I think the
Yeah.
AO's point is, I think this needs really, we as elected representatives need to be going back to our councils and spreading that message far and wide through those bodies to get it to the public as well. But you're absolutely right. Members, Dave.
If I might go first, just to respond
Yes.
to this, and not bring some members of the public are highly aware. The field naturalists, for example, are a local group, are commenting on this on social media, and I think that you could use the messages they've already been sharing to educate the broader public as well. And if that makes you feel more comfortable sharing it from an elected group, but not a government conservation authority or municipality, then there are just people who are commenting on this already.
Madam Clerk.
Sorry, was that me? Okay, sorry, assuming that's to me. I am, so first question, through the chair to Tim, is there any support that we can offer to your meeting with the MPP? Or is that easier in a one-to-one conversation?
For you, Mr. Chair. I think at this point, that I'll meet with MPP members, and Chair Ehring is invited to be there as well, as is Gloria Dangerfield, and we'll talk with MPP Vickers to provide our concerns and really hone in on the fact too that, especially for rural municipalities, this could be a much bigger issue than it is for municipalities. And as a local representative for agricultural communities in the area, I hope that message resonates the MPP. But certainly when we think about the way the system works right now, where budget vote is weighted by who has the highest assessment and who controls most of the dollars going in, I think we can assume if a similar structure exists in the future, that the large urban centers that would be included would carry the majority of the weight of any voting. And I think that should be a concern for Ontario.
I've got some follow-up questions, and building off of Member Maxwell's comment, I think that it's important to raise the profile that on my short time as an elected representative, big changes with short or non-existent consultation periods are something that I've come to expect and loathe. And as much as we can amplify the opportunity to provide comment both directly to provincial elected officials, but my understanding is also that anyone can submit feedback through the ERO posting. And I don't think that's something that a few generations worth of civics and careers classes has made universally understood. And if there are opportunities for the communication of the board's perspective to not just go into the ERO posting, but to be shared through specific press releases, or to look for opportunities for appearances on things like local call-in radio shows, that if we can spread the word about the possibility of public input, even when the window is small, that might increase that. And I am deeply troubled by, and maybe to use some watershed language, by the evaporation of municipal funds, or the increased evaporation of municipal funds, and the dilution of municipal voices. I am also wondering to what extent our own municipalities can amplify that, or if how much noise we can make, but it sounds like we'll find that out through those various meetings.
Thank you for that, member from right. What I would recommend is that these concerns are raised with your municipalities. Your councils can obviously make their own decisions on how they feel about this and where they land on it. I think in coming to those conclusions, it's important to recognize the realities of what a structure like this could mean for rural Ontario. There is a motion in the board package today in correspondence from the counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry out in Eastern Ontario. And I think resolutions like that from each member municipality, as many as 10 throughout the province, would go a long way. So in my opinion, as a conservation authority, we'll provide feedback, but I think it means less because we're the ones being changed. Right? So trying to hold on to either where we are today or some version of that. Municipalities are being impacted too, and you're being impacted on the premise that this is, if you don't believe that it's better for you, you need to say that.
Member Shaw, and then Member Dubin.
Yeah, so
you expressed some of the concerns I have, Tim. I think for rural Ontario, this is very, very concerning. I would concur. I hope PP would share those concerns. Looking at the programming that we provide here at Grace Sauble, and I would say sometimes there's like even a disproportionate benefit to agricultural communities because we have the stewardship program, and farmers really can benefit from that. And maybe that's a program that's not as applicable in some of the other municipalities within our current watershed, but at least we are still, it's a small enough group, and we have, you know, kind of that shared, I hope, or I think anyway, we have like a shared concern in the whole watershed being vibrant, and so we recognize that amongst one another here at the table. And so, yeah, like I'm just very concerned that, you know, when the region is now so big that like people don't even know where Grey Bruce is, let alone our own individual municipalities. Things like replacing logs in the Clendenin Dam, or maintaining the dike in Paisley, which, you know, like if you don't even know where those places are on a map, like how compelled are you to want to spend the dollars on those kinds of, you know, critical infrastructure, let alone the other good services and work that is done here. And I think history has told us that is what tends to happen. And I think, yeah, I think that is going to be a real detriment to Grey Bruce in rural Ontario, and just the nature of the challenges and the things that we deal with here in Grey watershed compared to what is happening in Newmarket and Aurora are just they're totally different situations in some cases, and I just really struggle with how some of those decisions are going to get made. And I think we can look at, you know, some of the things that come to this table or been deferred from this table in the last year, and, you know, would a board made up of, you know, would a regional board have looked at some of those things with the same sort of lens? So that's my concern. And then I don't know if the dollars are available or if it helps the argument, but I also think about how much time and money was spent on reorganizing into the three categories of programs over the last 2 years. Like that's been a 3 year exercise in futility, essentially, if, you know, if those things are all going to change. And so we talk about being efficient, and then that was just like, was that just a complete waste of time and money? Because what happens to that? We don't know that either. So I don't know if that's a point worth making to the MPP, but that's something that I've been thinking about too. Like we've been doing all this work that the province has been asking for, and at the end of the day, for what? So my only question is kind of along the same lines. Like I think so I appreciate the recommendation to have a motion. I think that's a great idea. I know for us, the media seems to pick up a lot of Aaron Ellerslie news for some reason or another. So we'll look to do that. I think they've been talking a lot about recycling changes right now, which is impacting us, but I would like to see that maybe replaced with this topic, because I think this is really a really important thing. So I guess the information that was in our package, I think, is really useful and helpful. Is there any concern with us sharing those sharing your questions? And I think really helpful to be able to say too, like, you know, the concerns that exist can be addressed in other ways without this extra layer of bureaucracy and cost. Because certainly that's like, none of us have extra room in our budget, and the idea that we're going to have to like spend more money to support another provincial agency is really not going to be appealing to taxpayers, I don't think, in Grey Bruce alone, and obviously.
I go to the chair. It's funny, 'cause you're right. The one thing I will say from having attended these meetings, so you're, what I'm finding is really missing here from the communications is the province does not seem to be interested in talking to the municipalities at all, except through the chairs to kind of disseminate back through this and through the CAO. Because realistically, as Tim has pointed out, this is gonna have a huge impact both governance and financially. We're funding the CAs. We may not have a voice at the table. So how, and it's being railroaded so quickly, how this is, I'm getting by these, using this almost as a way to skirt talking to municipalities, other than channeling through this. And that's very concerning, because it is gonna, we're definitely gonna put the burden of it as much as the independent conservation authorities. Each are doing.
Thank you. Yeah, so this theme of centralizing control, um, with results that, with more monies and with unknown results, and what we see are weakening results, is really a troubling path. I do just want to continue on the conversation about the rural voice and how can we ensure that we are helping, that to increase that rural voice in terms of the feedback, because I too agree that if we go down this path, I think the rural areas will be much more negatively impacted than the larger city centers. And so to that point, I'm wondering if we are, pushing these helpful points that, that we do have in our slides and through our presentation here today, are we helping to push those messages out to our local agri societies, to our regional agri societies, to Roma? I do want to ensure that that all our agri partners do have the facts in front of them, so that then if they wish to respond themselves, they do have the means to do that very quickly because time is really tight. So just wondering, should we just be doing that on our own, or just also, or are there some centralized efforts helping to ensure, these facts, these clear facts, are getting out to our agri partners?
Easy for everybody. So I just want to mention, maybe we should be talking to VP Sanderson as well. Talking about kind of in that odd world there. Okay. And I was wondering what, when we're talking about, show a map there, and sometimes language is pretty powerful to use it. And it's like we're almost creating a region the size of a small European country here. That might have pretty good impact when you're talking to somebody, say, listen, this size, I'm gonna find maybe it's Germany or maybe I don't know what it is. Right? But somebody brought that up to me in public. What do you got? What's going on here? I'm wondering if perhaps one of our member municipalities and someone who is gifted at creating motions would create a motion that we circulate amongst our municipalities, similar to what you brought up with the earlier one, just to raise awareness even within the Gray Sauble Conservation Network. Are we looking at that, do you think? Would that be wise?
What's the timing of that look like?
So yes, I mean, short answer first is yes, I think we can do that. Timing, I think it depends how the board directs us today. If it's something that the chair and I can tackle and then move forward with, works. The other thing to keep in mind too is that we do want to avoid a cookie cutter approach to that that looks like a form letter that the province just says, oh, well, you know, these are all one
Yeah.
document or something along those lines. So maybe a baseline that municipalities can tweak based on what their own councils see as the most important factors and what's relevant. And again, understanding that I obviously am not here to speak for you at this point or for your councils, but just to raise some questions that I think you should be asking yourselves.
Thank you. First of all, through the CAO, I mean, great presentation, Tim. I think you adequately addressed most of the concerns that I had when I first read that. And what I said to Member Day when we first got talking is my ultimate fear is that this is the province's way of freeing up developable land. If we take losing control at a local level and move. But and to build on what Member Shaw had said, right now there's quite a media presence out there right now about this recycling system and what the province has done. And I think the public is starting to engage in that, going, hey, wait a minute, what's the province doing? We're going back here 40 years in time with our new legislation. And I'm wondering if the board would direct maybe to some sort of media release that all municipalities could put on their social media platforms. And public watches that, and then give the public the opportunity to build on that release or whatever that form looks like, to submit their own comments. That goes in support of what you're saying is they're going to get multiple different comments from a lot of the public versus the cookie cutter based on municipalities. I still think there's weight in the municipal support, but I think the more that we can get out, the sooner we can get it out. And I think from what I've been seeing and hearing is this recycling is picking momentum. People on Grey Goose don't want to see large urban areas. They don't want to see us lumped into a small European country organization. They don't want to see us go back and lose some of the services that we currently have. And I think that the timing is right we've got 2 weeks to implement that and get it out. But I think right now we can what's going on as well.
I had two things to say. One was just to acknowledge the staff, because I'm sure this has been a tumultuous time for many members of staff, and I've always respected how calmly, at least on the surface, you approach all the changes that down and then eventually work their way up to us, the board. So I appreciate continuing to do that with this big possible change. And I wanted to support amplifying the message, and also just put it on the floor that I think we don't need to wait until the next meeting to start getting the message out. I think you are informed enough about general concerns, and I trust that you and the staff to come up with appropriate messaging.
Non-member.
If I can trust through the chair, if I can trust Wikipedia, and if we're going to more than 23,000 square kilometers, the new region will be larger than Belize, larger than New Jersey, larger than Wales, larger than El Salvador, and larger than Slovenia, to name just a few. I also, through the chair, sorry, just picking up another question about Member Dubik spoke about ag societies. I do wonder if it is possible to send, if we do have an active newsletter or list of community partners and contacts, if this information could be actively shared with those, at least all subcommittees of or subboards of the organization, if not all, whatever our larger partner mailing list is.
Ken, you
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Member Farmer, for that. And certainly it is our plan to do that level of dissemination. We just wanted to meet the board first to make sure that the board wasn't going to say something completely opposite to this. And we don't want to be messaging one thing when the board is messaging something else. One thing that also came to mind as you were all talking is some people don't like conservation authorities. Now it's shocking. And and that's fine. This is not the time that we're going to change people's minds if they sway one way or the other. But what I would empower you with, if you're talking to individuals in the community that don't have an affinity for conservation authorities, is they will like the system less in this new iteration, because the accountability will be less, the transparency will be less, the ability to pivot locally will be less. Your ability to reach somebody at a conservation authority could be less depending on what the new structure looks like. So like I said, I don't think this is the time that we're necessarily going to broad scale change public opinion, but I think it is important to recognize that no matter which lens you're looking at this through, it doesn't seem to be a productive change.
I think we could just compare to like anyone who has service from the OPP, we pay the cost of that. And we are told that cost. We don't have really any say in that. We don't, there's not a person we can call to come and like talk to our council to present, or we do get one report a year on what the service calls were, but like there's not a dialogue there, right? And compare that to when we have, when we're doing budgets and when there's like major changes. Tim's a phone call away and is happy to come and validate and talk to our council. And I don't see that being a reality in the future. And I would agree, right? If people might not love that they have to get a permit and working with the CA today, but at least there's a person you can talk to. And I don't know anybody who loves not being able to, when when there is no phone number and you have to go online, or I agree. I think the system will be even more rigid because now there is no person who you can who can come out and see your property and you can work through, find a solution that works. I'm sure some of us have permitting systems already that are kind of rigid, and you can't just work around those when it's like a box on the form on the website, right? So I would agree with that. And I was going to say, what I was going to say earlier was I would agree with Senator Dave's comments. I don't need to see the comments before you submit them. Like, I think if you're comfortable, like I'm comfortable with staff putting the comments together and submitting them, just so we can get them in there. Because I would share the concern that they could close the posting early and those 68 because voted on already. So I'm okay with that rather than waiting till the 17th.
Just thanks, Chair. I was just gonna also say that this is almost as similar to, when MZO was in this town. Basically marginalized the public of the process. And, this also is reducing the public's access to the elected official. And that is and considering we're going into an election cycle, I think that's going to be very, very important.
I was going through the speed it is very concerning because yes, I mean this would have been a great topic and all those there, but that's not going to be so summarize the motions on the floor is basically to receive the report as well as direct staff to prepare comments of submission. And Tim, I will ask, are you comfortable now with everything you've heard from the board to prepare that? And then it is our task to go back and disseminate that information at our own councils and to try and get this out, as said, to all our local ags, all our local members that can comment on this. So you're good?
Yes, absolutely. And and in terms of your own councils, I will be at most of them in the next week as well.
If that's the case, then I will ask for a vote. I did get a second on that, right? Can I?
Sure.
Thank you. So all in favor, please. Get out is carried.
Yes,
You give it a result, Jim. Member Carter, you
No, that was.
we're just been voting.
Yeah, I do have one thing. If we could add as a way to make through the chair, if staff are comfortable with this, as a way to make the transition the best that it could be, if we could also ask for a clause that makes it easily reversible, I would appreciate that.
Make note of that. You should have added in there as well, we should make the point, as Janet said, we're assuming as well that the board is comfortable with him moving with alacrity to do something and not having to come back and share it with us because we do not have time. So if we're comfortable with that, then his submission will go out to ERO and the governmental officials as required. Yes.
I just have a quick question. Has anybody consulted First Nations on this? The province?
So the province has, through you, Mr. Chair, province has set up briefing, I guess is the best way to describe them, sessions with conservation authorities, with municipalities and First Nations, independent of each other. I don't know if it's, we call it consultation, but that's all. The session that we had, microphones were turned off, cameras were turned off, and questions were screened before they were posted to be allowed to be asked.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so moving on. We could ask if anybody would just like a bio break, because I know we are trying to get through this. There's a lot covered. So does anybody want a break or can we soldier on? Get 5 minutes in, so then now 3:11, let's take 5. You would agree, I think. See, what? We went very well. Oh boy, I'm actually watching. Was your plot or your something? The lot more development, the area where it's done.
No, that's great.
Walking ring and fire and cultivated. Gonna be, yeah, there's a plethora of things. Yeah, well, there's a plethora of things for people to trip like you. Yeah, it's gonna be, yeah, it'll
But
be.
as I say, as long as we're talking about it, you don't talk about it.
Right, and we are back. Thank you. Moving on to next item is the Q3 budget report back information, attachment 11 in your packages. Allison will be presenting. I'll just put it on the floor. Whereas the Board of Directors approved the GSEA 2025 operating and capital budget on February 27, 2025. Motion FA-25-015. That the Board of Directors received staff report 034-2025. 2025 Q3 budget report back as information. May I have a move in a second, please? Winters, I'll turn over to you.
Go through the summary. Overall, GSEA has experienced a few unbudgeted changes at the end of the third quarter. We saw a retirement in the third quarter and an outside firm replaced this position, so we've got some cost changes and some savings there. We've also seen a reduced salary and wages in our planning department as a result of staff change. Overall, the 2025 budget is showing a surplus at the end of the third quarter. Our year-end forecast is also showing. This surplus consists mainly of the timber sales from earlier in the year, continued success in our parking revenue and season classes, and some successful grant funding endeavors that have increased funds for some programs. So on our capital side, I just kind of wanted to give you a bit of an update because there's certainly been a lot more happen this quarter than what had happened in previous quarters for the capital budget. The decommissioning of the Prairies at Colpoys and Bruce's Caves has completed in the third quarter. Eugenia, you'll see reflected in the fourth quarter report. These projects were all completed at less than budget, so there's savings there. There's a small correction in the cost of the Washington project, pardon me, at Inglis Falls. The parking signs that were originally recorded in with the Washington have been removed, so just a slight change in the cost of that. This correction is reflected in the lower part of the capital budget under the land section. That is where you see the parking signs and the QR codes of $2,977. The picnic area at Eugenia that were supposed to take place in 20 are now going to be completed in 2026, as well as the signage. And the stone arches repointing project has completed in the fourth quarter. So you'll see that with the next report. And the removal of the pavilion at Eugenia is planned to happen next week. Permit and weather permitting. And that's really all I want to bring to your attention. Does anybody have any more?
Thank you, Allison. Are there any questions? Seeing nothing, then thank you, Allison. And yeah, just all in favor?
Yes.
Thank you. That is carried. My conscience. Moving on, the next item, the GSEA assets status report. Whereas the Great Sauble Conservation Authority has a strategic priority of achieving organizational excellence, and whereas asset management planning is a vital component of successful and sustainable corporate operations, that the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors receive this report as information and direct staff to prepare a full asset management plan. We'll move to the seconder, please. Lecture Dumick and Member Day. Thank you very much. I'll turn that over to Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to start by saying been a slight change in plans from earlier in the year. So the goal of today was to bring you a more fleshed out asset management plan, but priorities have changed. obviously. So what I did want to make sure that you still had though was a review of the status of GSCA's assets and a review of the status of our reserves and projections for the 10-year profile of those reserves relative to the assets, because we are looking at the budget today, including the capital budget. So I thought it was important that you have this information. So what I'd like to note for starters too is that in terms of asset management planning, we maintain a database, and we have for quite some time, that includes all of our assets, acquisition date and cost, useful life, replacement date and cost, maintenance schedule, all of the things that you would expect to see in an asset management plan. It's just not formalized in that paper plan format. So staff keep it updated, and staff use it to determine which capital assets we're going to move forward with either replacement or investment in on an annual basis. But what we haven't provided the board with is a review of what are the state of our assets, and how does that relate to reserves. So when we think about asset management planning, and what I'm going to be providing you today is high. We're not going to look at every single asset that Gray Sauble owns, but rather by class of assets. And so the classes of assets are listed out in your report, and they're also listed out in the slide deck here. We have buildings, crossings, dams, different types of equipment, furnishings, public use features, signage, trail features, and vehicles. So I'll give you some examples. So buildings are pretty self-explanatory. Our admin center, shop buildings, washrooms, pavilions, things like that. Crossings, bridges, very straightforward. Beyond some bridges, that's where they're captured. Dams, again, relatively straightforward. Some of these are flood control structures. Some of them, most of them are recreation structures, and the accessories that go along that. So the winches that pull up the logs at Clendenin Dam would be considered under our dams assets. We have equipment broken into tools. So the examples I've given here: wood chippers, trail counters, sprayers, things like that. We have equipment that's vehicles, so this is different than passenger vehicles. So tractors, snowblower, ATV. The flood forecasting equipment that we operate. Office furnishing, which is self-explanatory. IT equipment, again, self-explanatory. Public use features, so these would include things that don't really fit nicely into a different box that occur on our land. So historical features like the Koran at Spirit Rock, or the stone arches, or the old power plant at Eugenia, things like that. Gates, playground structures, those types of things. Roads and parking, pretty self-explanatory, as is signage. Trail features, so we do list our trails in our asset management plan, but we don't have a replacement date or cost of it, because the assumption is we're not going to completely eliminate those trails and have to completely replace them, with the exception of the Stone Dust Trail in the Arboretum, which does have a cost and maintenance and so on associated with it, because it's a built trail versus a nature trail. But some other things in there would be the stairs that exist on trails, boardwalk features, lookout decks, so those types of things that help traffic. And then passenger vehicles, so our fleet. When we look at our total asset holdings, we have numbers that are presented here for the total value of all assets, not including lands, that we have, and that's about $29 million in assets. We have to understand that when we look at our assets, we're not planning to replace them all. So there are some that we look at and say, this asset was built in the 1980s, for instance, like a land asset, and the way the properties are used today is not the same as the way the properties were used in the 1980s. The way I always love to think about this is, if you drove down the 401 in the 1980s, there would be a picnic shelter area on the side of the highway. That's not there today because those. So when we look at the assets that we are actually proposing to replace, it's really $28 million in replacement costs. And it's important to remember a lot of that cost is featured in things like our administration center or the dams that we own and operate, which are very expensive if you have to replace them. And this is why when we start to look at the 10-year replacement cost and the 3-year replacement cost, that it doesn't come anywhere close to that $28 million mark. So Over 10 years, we're looking at about a $2.3 million replacement value, and that's where we would like to see an investment annually to make sure that we're capturing that in one way or another. 10-year maintenance costs are just shy of $800,000. Those are estimates. The 3-year replacement cost, which is a little more prominent, and the reason we chose 3 years is we were just presenting the 3-year budget as well. So it was important for us to know that asset replacement was within that time frame. And then the 3-year maintenance costs. And so those are listed there, $560,000 and $170,000 respectively. There's a couple visuals both in the report and in the slide deck that show the total cost of the assets versus the 3 and 10-year respective replacement periods. Important to recognize that you're looking at 2 different axes here. The total value is relevant to the right-hand axis, the other 2 to the left. And same with the maintenance costs. When we're looking at our assets, we're also prioritizing, obviously, and considering the state of those assets. And when we look at our assets, we've identified them on a 4-point scale from excellent through to poor. Very few of our assets classify as poor, which is a really good thing. When we look at the total number of assets, strictly by one asset equals most of our assets are in that good to excellent category. When we look at our assets in terms of the cost of replacing those assets, it drops down to that fair to good. The reason for that is the dams and the buildings start to come into play a lot more when we look at costs. And our dams are very expensive, and not all of them are in fantastic shape, but they're in fair shape, and they carry a lot. We look down again, just a visual so that you can see what that looks like by asset class. And you can see, looking at this, that the majority of our assets are in that excellent to good category, but then you can also see the costs associated with those. And again, looking at what falls into the poor category, it's under $10,000 worth of assets that would be considered. And some of those we may not choose to replace the way they are today. So the next thing that we looked at is, what do we have in terms of reserves to replace these assets? So we have several reserves that we hold right now. We have reserves for lands, admin, forestry, dams, stewardship, youth, IT, fleet, and drinking water source protection, or the risk management side of it. So not all of those are relevant here. Obviously, stewardship doesn't play into our assets. The youth reserve doesn't play into our assets, and the risk management reserves don't play in. The other ones do, to varying degrees. And so we looked at the 3-year and the 10-year replacement costs and compared those against our reserves. And what we did for our reserves is we looked at how much are we annually plugging into those reserves right now. So an example I'll give is the lands reserve. We plug about $45,000 into that annually from parking. So for 2026, we just took 2025 known value reserves at the start of the year and used budgeted additions and deletions plus a small 1.7% factor for interest earned to come up with what we expect the 2026 costs to be. This won't be bang on because we know already that we're going to consider those reserves and that we actually didn't hold as much as we thought. For the 3-year and the 10-year projections, we just carried that out over a 3-year period, assuming untouched, with no compound interest or any interest, and then same for the 10-year period. So if we assume, again, using parking as the example, that we're going to put $45,000 into the lands reserve every year, we can assume obviously that $50,000 over a 10-year period. So that's what gave us our starting points for a comparison at 3 years and a comparison. What you're seeing here in this graph is showing that the reserves are surplus at the end of 3 years for everything except for IT, which will show a slight deficit at the end of 3 years. within that 3-year time. We then add maintenance to that cost, and we're seeing the same thing. When we look at 10 years, it's a little bit different story. So all of the reserves, except for lands, are now showing some level of surplus in the reserve. Lands is showing itself being oversubscribed. So there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, as we've identified, we have a substantial need within the lands reserve, so $1.6 million to replace or invest in over the next 10 years. In addition to that, we have a relatively healthy land reserve today, at the start of 2025, but we've approved and agreed that we're taking $1,000 of that and investing it in the administration center. So it draws it down. We're also being very conservative by saying that we put $45,000 a year for reserve, because over the last several years, we've actually contributed more than that. And this year, we actually had quite a bumper year with our needs, I think, driven probably by the fact that people are choosing to travel locally. So we do have the potential that we'll invest higher than that, but this gives you a snapshot anyway. So what that means in terms of addressing potential surpluses and potential deficits is, in the areas where we're seeing surpluses, we may not need to contribute as much to those reserves if there's an opportunity to do that. So when I look at IT, if we're currently contributing $25,000 to $30,000 in levies annually, we may reconsider that in terms of, if the reserve or if the replacement costs warrant that, then we would adjust yearly. In terms of lands, we haven't done a deeper dive into other sources of revenue for replacement of those reserves. So there's a couple of other things we can look at here. One is, do we need to replace like for like? So staff have been doing a very good job of considering those things and factoring it in. We can always give it another look. So does it need to be replaced like for like? Does it need to be replaced at all? Can its useful life be drawn out further? Those are some of the first things we would look at. The next things are, will we actually invest more in this reserve because we're being conservative and we haven't also factored in interest? We haven't looked at partner contributions, cost sharing. So an example there would be trail features. So a large boardwalk, say at Inglis Falls, well, we share that trip with Bruce Trail. So we would talk to the partners like the Bruce Trail about cost sharing, places like that. So not all of that cost liability is with things, especially like land assets. There's opportunities for grants. There's opportunities for donations and funding campaigns. There's the cost sharing. So there are a lot of other things we can look at, but what I wanted to give you here today is a very basic, straightforward picture of where things stand. In a simple form, if we just look at money we essentially have in hand today. So you'll see maintenance on some of those features also draws that down into a deficit position as well. So next steps, as we've gone over, is to reassess our asset needs and the replacement dates, the distribution of the reserves. So we did pull some vehicle type equipment into the lands, like lawnmowers, because they're used to maintain our lands. But if we find that we're going to have a surplus in our fleet reserve and a deficit in our lands, we may reassign some of those so that it balances a little bit better. And identify opportunities for cost sharing, grants, and donations. And then ultimately prepare a full asset management plan that demonstrates the steps we propose to take. So what that would look like is, I don't like the idea of saying these are all of our assets and this is the relevant information that we have in the database, because the next day, the next year anyway, it's dated and not useful anymore. But what we do want to look at is what are our needs, as we've done? What do we know that we have available to us? And then what are the steps that we're going to take to make sure that we're not in a deficit position at the end of that 10-year period? And some of those items are listed here. The other one would be, if there's still a deficit showing, is making a decision as a board as to, do we maintain all these assets? And if so, what does a funding strategy look like for them? And there are ways to build it into, say, municipal levy without it being a hard pill to swallow. Because it could be something as simple as saying, we're going to add, and I'm making up numbers right now, but we're going to add $5,000 this year, and that's going to be static. But next year, we're going to add $5,000, and that's going to be static. And so they would be incremental increases, but over a 10-year period would make a big difference. So we haven't done that level of review right now, but just to provide the board with the relevant information. Through you, Mr. Chair, I would welcome any comments or questions.
Tim, attending Bill 28 didn't exist. That's a great report. Any questions? I'll come back to it.
I have a selfish question, Chair. So you're coming to Sauble Mountains with the budget. So Clondenin's Dam is probably, it's the only flood management dam, correct? So how much of that, of your, what's that? How much are you putting in each year to replace Clondenin's Dam? Because that may be a good selling point at the council table.
So we don't break it out quite that way. So the way we do break it out is we have a dam reserve that covers all of our dams, and we contribute $25,000 annually to that reserve. So Clendenin is one of those. So what we'll see is, what the council will also see, if you look at our budget over the last several years, we've been actively investing and drawing from the reserve to do work at Clendenin. So we've replaced all of the stop logs there the last few years. We've removed the silt buildup behind it, replaced the winches that are used to raise and lower those stop logs. We were able to offset that cost, provincial government, through the water erosion infrastructure.
Okay, well, that'll be helpful. Thank you.
My question is also related to dams. I guess just like what is the life expectancy of the dam? If we're not replacing it in 10 years.
Yeah, they do have a long life expectancy, and I guess the way we're approaching it is that we're going to continue to invest in maintenance for those dams. So I think most of them are slated, like the 10-year horizon is 2035, I guess, right now. And there's most of them are slated into 2050 or so. And so what it looks like more specifically is major investment. So I think we have a $200,000 maintenance investment into, I believe, the Owen Sound Mill Dam within a 10-year horizon. The idea, just like an old building, is to keep the investment so that you never labor replace it. But with some of the dams, there may be an opportunity to look at divestment as well.
Well, Michael, you just have a quick question there. So we just went through something in Sauble Mountains where inflation ate up most of our reserves. Like, how do you factor in inflation into replacing a dam or something like that?
So staff has done a really good job of trying to figure out what those replacement costs would be at the end of 10 years or at the end of the useful life of an asset based on having inflationary same. Yes.
Any other questions? All right, seeing nothing, then I'll just ask for a vote to receive the report. All in favor?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm not talking about budget so much. The 26-28 GCA budget draft for circulation. And yes, whereas GSCA staff have prepared the 2026 draft budget for the board of directors consideration. And whereas the Conservation Authorities Act requires that this draft budget be circulated to participating municipalities for a minimum 30-day commenting period, that the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors receive the 2026 draft budget. And that staff be directed to distribute the 2026 draft budget and budget companion to participating municipalities for the minimum 30-day review period. And that staff bring the board before the board of directors at the January 2026 meeting of the board for final review and approval of the 2026 budget. I have a mover and a second, please. Member Shaw. Member Witcher, thank you. Over to you, Tim.
Mr. Chair. So we did present the budget to the board in October. And at that point, we had come forward with just the operating budget and an increase of about 3.5% or 3.4% at that time. This budget presents almost identically to what was presented at that time, except for a couple of changes that have come forward to us related to salary and wages. And that is largely related to CPP. And so we've made those changes to the budget, and where that shows up is on the salary and wages line item, and then also on the funding side of the budget, depending on where that was. The other thing that has been added that you haven't seen prior to receiving this package and today is the capital side of the budget. So you can see there all of the capital costs that are proposed. And this falls very closely in line with where we were in 2020. So 2025 was an anomaly because we had an extra $3 million in the capital budget to cover the administration center. We don't have that large sum showing in this budget anymore. What we do have is, if you look at the administration portion of the capital budget on page 176 package, or page 4 of the budget, you'll see $190,000, and that's the ongoing carry forward to repay the debt that we have. So we'll borrow $2.1 million from the city of Owen Sound to add to the $1 million that we had that we were using in reserves to complete the project, and the 190,118 is the carry forward that for 14 years or so to the municipalities. It's slightly higher than it was in 2020 budget. It was 179, the 2025 budget. And the reason for that is when we got the costing in April, it was $100,000 more, and the board approved that at the time. So we had to borrow $100,000 more from the city of Owen Sound. So an extra $10,000 is added in here to cover that replacement cost plus interest over the 15-year period. So what I would note, and I noted this at the last meeting, is in the budget itself, the operating budget, it's relatively, we're looking at a 3.89% total increase in the operating cap combined from levy. And this represents about 1.7% increase over changed in assessed values. So we have seen assessed values go up this year by a little over 2%. And but at the end of the day, our proposed levy increase is about $78,000 split amongst the municipalities. To provide a level of perspective to this, it's about 92 cents resident in the watershed per year, or 2 cents per resident per week. So it's relatively minor, but we do understand that increases are an increase. Our changes are dominantly related to staff costs and the increases associated with that. We did try to keep the budget as lean as possible. Where we see noticeable change in the budget is that engineering services ceases to exist as a line item within the budget. And it's split between environmental planning, which is funding a good portion of it, and water management, which has been renamed water and engineering services. And the reason is that engineering services provider, Ian, is also our succession plan for John Bidor's. So Ian's time in the future, starting 2026 and moving forward, will be split between environmental planning engineering work and water engineering. So that's captured there. We're also seeing a reduction in sales and services in the admin section of the budget, communication section of the budget, and the IT section of the budget. And the reason for this is that we're not seeing the revenues that we'd hoped for in planning. This is not a surprise to me. We've talked about it several times. We're taking action to reduce the burden that those fees have to come. And so we're doing that by reducing the amount that's going into those other three departments. In communications, that's being offset with a slight reduction in spending and an increase in levy. In IT, it's being offset by the savings through a retirement this year, and then taking on a service provider instead of rehiring a staff person. And in admin, it's being covered by savings that we've realized by our insurance costs going down. So we're taking the steps that we can to keep the budget as low, so as sustainable as possible. With that, I would sit back over to you, Mr. Chair, for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Tim. Great year to go to a 3-year budget with Bill 86. We'll keep beating that horse. Okay.
Actually, if I may. So I forgot to mention that, yes, in October, we presented a 3-year budget to the board. You'll notice in your package today that years 2 and 3 are grayed out. They're there, but they're grayed out. And it's because we have no certainty as to what 2027 and 2028 look like. If we retain status quo, we've got a good starting point. If things move in the direction that the province is suggesting, or some modified version of that, we still have a starting point to go into those discussions with. So it's still here, but you're only really looking at 2026.
Any questions? Sean?
So through the chair, this is a very small amount, but the revenues from municipal levy, category 1 for education. I wondered if you could get to those.
Absolutely. So a portion of the majority of our education program is category 3, and we fund that through non-levy sources. A small portion is related to education around natural hazards, which is a mandatory program, and educating the public and communities on natural hazards is listed as one of the mandatory items.
So the work there is essentially communications work. Yeah.
You could call it that. I mean, it's intended to actually be education, and we've developed programming through actually through some additional funding that we received through Hydro 1 as well. So we're able to leverage that levy to generate even more revenue.
Thank you.
Richard?
Thanks, Chair. Am I allowed to ask how much interest rate Owen Sound is charging us?
Yes, I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe it's 4 points. It's not so much that Owen Sound is specifically charging. Well, they are, but it was an agreed to rate. So we looked at what the banks were offering at the time. We looked at what Infrastructure Ontario would be offering at the time, and we came to an agreement, and the board approved that rate. And so what we've done is we've locked that rate in over the 15-year period, which is a good deal for Owen Sound in terms of certainty, but it's also a good deal for us in terms of certainty.
I'm just kind of wondering because Great County charges 3.5. That's what they recommend for DC deferral. So I just wondered. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you for the report, Tim. I will look for a vote to accept the report as presented. All in favor? And
Yes.
that is, there you go. That's what we're waiting for. That is carried.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to the board committee review. Tim, this will be you again, but this is going to look at committee. So the motion reads, whereas the GSCA staff committed to undertake a review of existing GSCA committees, and whereas staff conducted a survey of board members on both existing and potential committees, and whereas the provinces of Ontario has proposed substantial sweeping changes to the Conservation Authorities Act that would cause GSCA to cease to exist in its current form, that the board of directors direct staff to terminate this project and cancel any subcommittees for the 2026 year. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? John, everything. Thank you very much. We can be a little bit of
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. The motion's pretty self-explanatory, but we put a survey out to board members. We received responses from most board members. Thank you for the time that you put into that. Before we had a chance to fully collate the information, we received changes from the province. So what we were looking at through that survey is both an assessment of the existing committees that we have, but also other committees that we need to set in the future. If the changes that the province is proposing occur in the format that the province is proposing them, Grey Sauble itself need any committees. So Grey Sauble itself become a larger entity. So in discussions with the chair and the vice chair, it was proposed that we stop any work on that project, bring it to the board for further direction. My recommendation to the board is, given uncertainty around that, is that we don't invest the time in these committees right now, and that we wait and see where we are at this time next year.
I just have a quick question, because I don't know where this fits, but the Beaver River Watershed Initiative?
No, we're only talking about subcommittee of the board.
Committee or subcommittee, or what are they?
So, I mean, they are, but they're more of a volunteer group.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is current existing committees being the Forestry Committee, the Indigenous Relationships Committee, and Cultural Committee. And then we looked at what we might choose to form. The idea right now is that we would pause the three that already exist until further notice.
Well, thank you, because we have an AGM coming up, I'm going to, and I just want to make sure. Okay.
Through the chair, the motion that I'm reading in my package says cancel any subcommittees for the 2026 year. Am I right in understanding that if Tim just said pause, that pause? I would seek some clarification around the language of canceling committees, disbanding, pausing, cancel committee meetings. Are we giving up everything because are we getting rid of the furniture because we think the house is going to sell, or are we just not going to dust while we figure out whether or not we're getting renovated?
Yes, is the appropriate answer, I think. I think at this point there's an expectation that there will be a lot of figuring to do in 2026. There's a lot of uncertainty as to where things will stand at the end of that. That time and resources would be better spent on not investing in any new committees for sure. The agricultural and the forestry committee have not super active to begin with, so revamping those at this point does not seem good exercise. And the Indigenous Relationships Committee was meeting about once or twice a year, but the idea would be to pause it for now.
Interestingly, yes, that's one thing we really, in your whole report about Bill Woodville, one thing that really isn't mentioned here is the committees. He's gonna have its own standing committees. And you talk about category 3 things, which are gonna be mostly locally impacted by this. Might not be a bad idea to talk about those committees as well, because they also directly impact. I mean, they tend to, again, on rural capacity, on indigenous capacity, they deal much more with the local flavor. So those committees will lack thereof, or what they're going to look like, will definitely be impacted as well. Something I don't think we've actually mentioned, and I don't think anybody's asked during our any of those meetings or transpired thus far. It might not be a better thing just to mention. Member Shaw.
Yeah, and so I guess through the chair, does this change what happens with the Gray Sauble Foundation? It's, I think the decision was already made to wind the foundation down and close it, I'll say, and I know that's not the right word, but, is there, and maybe, and it's not a decision for this table, I guess, but you know, is there merit of pausing that for a little bit, to kind of see what happens? I'm just thinking about some of the programs and, you know, the future of some of the programs. And, you know, if maybe, like, maybe there's an opportunity that some of those programs live on through another entity. But obviously too soon to know or anything, but maybe it would be prudent to just hold on that until we know, so that we're not winding it down and then a year from now, you know, wish there was a mechanism there to do something with.
Yeah, very, the foundation is having those exact discussions. So I think the plan at this point for that and for other reasons, associated with some GICs that they hold, is to go dormant for 2026 and, look to Member Day to refresh my memory on whether they formally made that decision.
Yes, and it is primarily due to the GIC that wouldn't lose us for financial value if we close it sooner than letting it mature. But I think I don't think the foundation is considering, the current members of the foundation are definitely not considering sticking on for another provincial changes in response. They began because of cutbacks to GSE and to conservation authority funding from the 90s. So they've seen the conservation authority through many changes over the years, but I guess through that financial quirk, it does leave that opportunity should something really change for so that you provide instead.
Yeah, and I get, and like, not suggesting that the members, but having like that corporation exists provides, you know, potential opportunity in the future. There's nobody at this table beyond a conservation board anymore that is interested in continuing to support some of these.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe they're coming in November to speak to us, or today's December. December to speak to us about some of the programming that they hope to be involved in for 2026 and possibilities for into possibly like the memorial forest obviously has some trees need to look after.
Yes, so further we'll be back here for a board meeting in 3 weeks and the foundation will be a delegation.
Okay, seeing nothing else, then I will call the vote on the motion. All in favor?
Yes,
And that is carried. Thank you. So let's move on to forestry and get a forestry fees update. And whereas the GSEA Forestry Department provides forest management services to private landowners throughout GSEA jurisdiction. And whereas this fee schedule is reviewed on an annual basis to ensure fees are consistent and appropriate, that the GSEA Board of Directors approved the 2026 forestry fee schedule as presented. And would you hear this, please? Renee. Where was she? Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, Mike couldn't be here this afternoon. So he's entrusted this to me to look after. So as noted in the motion, our forestry department has two sides to it. One side is dealing with work on Gray Sauble's lands, managing forests in a sustainable way. And the other side is providing fee-for-service professional services to private landowners. And these fees are reviewed annually. But this year we're making some more dramatic changes than we have in the past. And the reason for that is there's a growing discrepancy between our fee schedule and the cost of providing these services, and we need to work towards buying that. And so Mike and I have spent quite a bit of time going over the historic data, well, the last 4 years anyway, looking for trends and then looking at how we can fix that. And it'll take more than 1 year to do that so that there's not a market shock within the fee schedule. But some of the key changes that we're looking at is, so the fee schedule itself is included on page 240 of your package. At the very top, you'll see professional advice. And we used to, in our 2025 version of that, we have a flat rate. We're moving that to an hourly rate to make sure that the time that it takes to do the work is effectively. We are increasing the tree and service costs at a pretty nominal rate. And then one of the bigger changes that we're looking at right now is incorporating deposits. So what we found is sometimes we get left literally holding the bag if somebody orders trees or tree planting services and then they cancel after the turn back. So then our team is in a position of either having to try and find another place to sell or plant these trees, or to try and maintain them and alive for a future year. And so what we proposed in here is adding essentially refund criteria and an administrative fee that applies. So the administrative fee on tree planting would be 10%. Would be the cost of the trees. And so we receive quite a lot of subsidy for landowners when we plant trees for them. And typically what the landowner pays is the actual cost of the tree, and then the subsidy covers all of the work that goes into planting it and review and all of that. So that deposit would be due at the time of signing. And if the individual who hired our services were to cancel prior to the term back date, so our term back date is February 1st, so we've given ourselves a week of lead time there. They would get everything back except 10% because some staff work will have already gone into it. We need to make sure we're covering our time. And then if it's after that term back date, then we would keep the deposit. We would make this very upfront and very known to people so it's not a surprise. To avoid is somebody hiring our services, Gray Sauble purchasing the product, and then them canceling. And this, Mike and I have talked about this. This is very in line with any other service you would order. If I hire a plumber and they have to order a shower or a toilet for me, I'm certainly going to be paying for that one way or another. I get the service charge refunded to me. In terms of tree sales, where people pre-order trees from us and they come to our shop and pick them up, we would have an administrative fee of $35 an order. Seedlings, or $2.50 per tree for a landscape stock tree. And if they canceled before January 23rd, we would retain that administrative fee, not the rest. And if they cancel after January 23rd, the full deposit, 50% deposit on those trees, would be retained by Gray Sauble. And again, this would be known to people in advance when they place the order. So it wouldn't be a surprise, but it serves to protect our interests and doesn't let people just back it because some skin. So with that, I turn it over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Are there any questions on the report?
I'm thanks, Chair, on the trees. Like, why couldn't you just offer a reduction to pay up front, the whole thing? And then you know, right in it. I mean, it's like if you go on an airplane, if you pay up front early, you get a reduced rate. That's, I mean, I'm just thinking from a business point of view, maybe I'm incorrect on.
Yeah, we could. I think part of the challenge for us in talking with Mike is that there's There's a challenge with when we sell the trees to people and when we get verification from the nurseries that they can supply us with this. And so there's some unknowns in there. So we tend to charge the difference when they actually go to the trees, because then we know.
Okay.
Okay. Seeing nothing else, then I will call the vote to accept the forestry free fee schedule as presented. All in favor?
Yes. Yes.
That's carried.
Thank you very much.
So, still under the forestry. Before. What the Gray Sauble Conservation Authority owns and manages over 11,300 hectares or 28,000 acres of land comprised of 207 individual properties organized into 79 groupings. And whereas GSCA manages nearly 5,260 hectares or 13,000 acres of forested area to offset the operating expenses of the forestry department, that the Gray Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors award the following forestry tender. Waiting for this one because it'll give me the names. Sauble Fuel Tender GSC 25-1 for call for uplands management area. And you go ahead and I'll fill in the blanks later.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we'll just go through this quickly. We did open up our latest tender last night. And this one is for a property in our Polipor upwards management area. It's a property owned by Gibraltar in the town of Blue Mountain. And in that particular bush, we marked up for a harvest 29,563 board feet of saw logs and 120 cords of firewood. And we got 4 good bids for that particular package. And as you can see there on the end of the Vester Forest Products was the high bid there with $35,000, which was well above our estimated amount for that. And so the staff is recommending that the board award the tender to Vester Forest Products for their bid of $35,000.
Thank you, Cam. I'll finish that motion with Saw Log and Fuelwood Tender GSC 25-01 for call for uplands management area, Department 94 to Vester Forest Products Limited with a total bid of $35,000, subject to signing the agreement. And moving the second report.
I just need to ask.
Well, I'm putting this on the floor. Give me a mover and a seconder and I'll
move it.
Thank you. Sorry. Oh, thank you, Member Barlow. Go ahead.
Okay, so we've got notice in the town of Blue Mountains that for the Collabora uplands, that they're talking about making that area into a nature reserve, right from Collabora over to Duncan Caves and then eventually over to, we're hearing over to Lurie. Does this impact at all what we're doing here for any implications of what we're doing for on the woodlot management here?
I think I'm going to defer that question to someone else.
Okay, I just want.
No, it doesn't. So that nature reserve only applies to the crown lands in that area. So the crown isn't coming in looking at private lands like Gray Sauble and saying this is a nature reserve. They're looking at lands that they already own. And so those.
Okay, so but you were asked to comment on Gray Sauble, correct?
It was provided.
Land on that around board.
Yeah, I don't think.
Well, okay, all right.
Seeing nothing, I'll ask for the vote to approve the motion. All in favor?
Yes.
And now it is carried. Thanks, Dan. Let's move on to the CAO.
Well, it'll be easy. I had nothing to report, Mr. Chair.
Well, the consideration of time, I'm going to echo that because we're still moving along. So on that note, then I'm going to move, I'll read the resolution to move into a closed session. Yeah, well, I don't actually have to do one of them. I wanted to do it for. Yeah. No. So motion that the Grace Sauble Conservation